Well, hello everyone. Welcome to IPDay's Wednesday webinar titled IET Program Student Success Plan. My name is Ariel Pachokas, Director of Collier County Public Schools Adult Education Programs, and with me today is...
I am Vanessa Alvarez, and I'm a resource instructor for Collier Adult Education.
So before we begin, please remember to use the Q&A for questions, as all attendees' microphones will be muted and in listen-only mode. We know there will be questions along the way, so we will be pausing to address those questions entered in the Q&A. Please don't hesitate to ask your questions as they come up. Finally, today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the IPDay website within 48 hours for you to reference in the future. So today we'll be discussing a little bit of the intent behind an IET program student success plan. We've titled the presentation intentionally IET Program / Student Success Plan in order for, with the reason that if we really want to make any specific program improvements, or we want the IET programs to succeed, we really need to focus and focus the attention on the students. If our students aren't successful, then the program won't be successful. We'll also discuss some of the data elements we have been gathering to ensure our student success. We also will share some of our approaches to gathering that data. As we share some of the elements we gather, you will need to make a determination on what information is most relevant for your students and your program success, depending on the intended outcome of your IET programs. Please make note that what we are sharing are only best practices that we have put in place to best support our students and ensure the intended success of our IET programs. We then will discuss how we are using student feedback and that data to inform and refine our IET programs for our next cohort of students. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll then be focusing on identifying potential challenges or questions regarding implementing a successful plan, establishing some simple next steps for those who would like to get started, and finally, gather your feedback on today's presentation with a brief survey, IPDay survey. So as we get started, let's get into the why of the IET program student success plan. WIOA has been requiring adult education providers to be more deliberate in preparing adult learners for the workforce. At the end of the day, our students are seeking opportunities to gain the skills to enter the workforce or advance within it as quickly as possible because of necessity. I share this because if we are building IETs with an intentional outcome, then we need to be deliberate in ensuring we help our students meet those outcomes. So here we have a snippet of NRS Table 11, which looks at the outcome achievements for your IET participants. This is a relatively new NRS table going back now perhaps 2 years. The reason for having this in mind and starting with this is that it highlights for us primary indicators of performance. That's column 1. And these are the outcomes that NRS is looking for our participants. But as we go through them, we're going to start noticing that these are really the outcomes that, if we're really looking for success among our students and among the program, these are the pieces we need to consider. These performance indicators should, in working towards these outcomes, it's not necessarily that each one of these performance indicators will be representative in an IET, but hopefully there's at least one of these that are being targeted. Let's start with the first performance indicator real quick as an overview, which is at least one educational function level, achievement of at least one educational function level. Did the student make a gain from one level to the next while in your IET program? In the second row, it highlights attainment of a secondary school diploma. Did the student earn a high school equivalency while in the IET program? The third row references secondary or post-secondary transcripts. Was the student enrolled in a technical training program as an IET student and did they complete a course? Row 4, progress towards milestones. In Florida, this is unique for Florida. This only applies to the completion of a registered pre-apprenticeship program. Row 5, passing an approved technical or occupational industry certification exam. In our case here, we have only 4 programs working towards industry certifications out of our 6 programs, IET programs that we offer. An example of that could be the Para-Pro exam or the Certified Nursing Assistant, depending on your programs. So those are those are the 5 performance indicators within your immediate control. However, there are others listed beyond that, but those become more difficult to capture, such as the employment second quarter and fourth quarter after exit, or meeting earnings second quarter after exit. Good thing that Florida Department of Education is helping us with that. So thank you to the DOE. However, that's where we are asking students for their Social Security numbers. That's a key piece. Without that, we won't be able to capture, or the DOE won't be able to capture that information. Remember, we can't require the Social Security number, but if students understand the why, they are more willing to provide it. So regardless of your why for providing an IET, the bottom line is, does it lead to employment or advance in employment? Without that, what's in it for the students? So if we're talking about setting up a program for success or ensuring our student success, we need to kind of keep the end in mind of what is it that we're trying to do for our students. Now that we have an understanding of the why, let's get into understanding the needs of our students with specifically in terms of IET.
So surveying our students allows us to understand what they're hoping to gain from the IET and how we can customize our IETs around their main goals. So a lot of this data we do take at intake, but the difference is this information doesn't always get down to the teacher level, which helps the IET teacher know who is in their class, what brought the students in, what their goals are, and how we can start to direct the class to help them achieve those goals sooner. So before we jump into what our actual survey looks like, let's take a look at some of the information we've gained from doing student surveys. So in this top picture, this is our intro to healthcare IET. These are our students' responses to what their highest completed education level is before they started adult ed classes. So you'll notice that 2/3 of our students in the intro to healthcare, in this most recent cohort that is, hold a college degree from their home country, 66%. So that kind of changes the dynamics of what we typically think about when we think about adult education. So these are students who have international degrees, probably want to be more than a nursing assistant as their end goal. So that influenced how that teacher taught intro to healthcare. She also had an even mix of other educational levels, but all had at least a high school diploma. And then HVAC, that's the bottom one there, bottom right, is pretty similar, with half of them having a college degree. So when teaching HVAC to this part of the population, you can kind of think, okay, what do we focus on now? What's going to be the most important things to reach with the HVAC? So this next slide, these are some word clouds that came from our survey results. So this is from the Intro to Healthcare again, and the HVAC again. Top is healthcare, bottom HVAC. And these are their answers to how this class, they think the class will help them with their next steps. So remember, this is from the students' perspectives. You'll notice some patterns. And Intro to Healthcare, many of them are using this as a step towards continuing their education in nursing. They want those medical terms. They want to get the best preparation they can to be successful in future nursing programs. You can see things like the T's, healthcare classes, medicine, health, dream as a nurse. And then for HVAC, you can see that many are looking for jobs and a step towards those jobs. So we know that we need to work on the transition from IET to employment in both of them, but you can really see the emphasis in HVAC. We may need to bring in employer partners to ensure that our students are ready for employment before the class finishes. And then just one more example here. Here we see short-term and long-term goals. These are the students. What they're saying is their short and long-term goals. So we included different ones from each just to give you an idea of responses that we got. Intern to healthcare students, their short-term goals were looking to move on to careers in nursing or going into nursing programs like nursing assistant. So you can see, these words that pop up often. And then for HVAC, you're going to see that they have long-term goals, and many are looking for stable work, right? Work stability, constant work. So again, this helps us focus on helping these students transition from the class to employment, connecting them with employers, and preparing them for that interview.
And again, I'll just reiterate one more time. While a lot of this we already collected intake for WIOA, this information doesn't usually get passed on to the instructors, or it doesn't make its way down to the instructor level. So by kind of building it into our course, it gives the instructor an opportunity to see where their students are, what they're coming in for again, and most importantly, just build that understanding of the student's interest and how best we can support them moving forward as we're working through this IET.
So now that we have seen some of the sample information that we get from the surveys, let's take a look at the survey itself. I'm going to pull this up in just a moment for you. We give the survey to our IET students within the first week of class. And the sooner we capture this information, the better we're able to serve our students. So we know that where we're heading. I'm also going to put a link in the chat in case you want to use the same survey form. So let me put it right there. So it will have you create a duplicate in Office 365, but you could certainly copy this information to go to Google format as well. So let me just pull up that survey for us. All right, so this is what the survey is going to look like. You can see that we ask for their full name. The next question, we give them choices, and this is their highest completed education level before they started adult education classes. Sometimes this can be interesting because it doesn't always match up with what they listed in their initial intake form, which can open up some conversations with the students for clarification. But this is where we got that information that a lot of our students had four-year degrees from their home country. We found it helpful to ask about their profession or job or field of study from their home countries. Often it does not match with the IET they're taking now, and that's fine because this generates some good conversations about why they are changing direction. When they have similar jobs or fields or study from their home country, it can also show us that they're already highly qualified. And we can encourage them to get their transcripts evaluated to help them move more quickly towards a higher goal. So just as an example, we had a student who was recently in our Intro to Healthcare class, and they had a nursing degree from her home country. So she took the NCLEX. It took her a couple of times, but when she passed there, she got the scores she needed, and she got her transcripts evaluated. She was able to move quickly into a full-time nursing position and is now employed in Weston, Florida. So again, if we know what their education level was, what they used to do in their home country, this can help us move them a little more quickly. So in this particular survey, numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, this is where we're asking them separately about short-term and long-term goals, but you can combine them into one question if you wanted to. And same thing with what support they will need. In this survey, we asked what support they would need for their short-term and long-term goals. Number 8, we asked about barriers and obstacles, and we gave them examples so they understood why we were asking. We know that a lot of our students have barriers with transportation, childcare, finances, work schedules. So knowing what these barriers are can help us find them resources as well as to be aware of and sensitive to those barriers. And then although students have plenty of barriers, most students have some sort of support system, and it's also helpful to be aware of this, as well as if they don't have much support at all. And then finally, the last question is asking the students for their perspective on how they think this class will help them towards their goals or next steps. So I'm just going to pause there for a second see if there's any questions so far about the survey or the questions.
No questions yet, but I just kind of echo and repeat it again just for clarity and for anybody who might have connected late. Again, these questions look very familiar. They're very much the same as the questions from WIOA. The only difference is when we're often collecting these questions, they end up in our student management system where nobody else sees them. The intent here is really to kind of gather the students' most recent information of where they are, what the goals are, and really try to see how we can help align their goals, their interests, their barriers, their challenges, and their background experiences to move them as quickly as possible.
All right, so what do we do with these survey results? So how does this guide our student success plan? Well, we have a student management system for our data, but something that we like to use in addition, and our main go-to place, is a shareable spreadsheet. This shareable spreadsheet is live. So we use Microsoft, you can use Google, anything that is live so that any stakeholder that has access can see at a glance what students are enrolled in the class, what their scores are, their contact information, all this important information. One person can be updating the spreadsheet and someone else can see this new information go in live. So we don't have to constantly email each other, call each other back and forth, trying to get different pieces of information.
And while in our student management system, all of this information is held in there, it's not always the most friendly for a teacher when they have to go student by student gathering that information. Instead, here in a snapshot, they can see their class roster, and as they scroll across, any identifying information or any required information that they're looking for or trying to remember of where they left off with that student.
So we have a sample spreadsheet that I'm going to pull up here in a second. Just a shareable spreadsheet sample. There we go. So this is our shareable spreadsheet, an example anyway. These are obviously not real students, but some of the comments and scores are examples of what we have seen in a recent Parapro cohort.
And while this is a sample for a Parapro, each one of our IETs, we've created one of these spreadsheets for. Why? Mainly to, one, ensure that the teacher knows who's in their roster and who they need to be, who they're accountable for, but also at a snapshot, have all the relevant information that they might need to, one, work with the student, work with the class, plan for lessons, but more importantly, also focus on that progression. If we're going to be transitioning, the goal is at the end of that IET, what's the end goal? Well, if it's a certification exam, if it's employment, if it's moving into a technical training program, then do we have all the pieces lined up for them to be most successful in that transition?
Okay, so going from left to right, I'm going to start kind of over here at the left. The columns are, you can see these first few up here are kind of this vanilla color. They're data points that we can get straight from our student management system. So their name, identifying information, when they started and ended the course, their pre and post test scores. You can see here, for example, I've got them stacked with the pre-test scores on top and post-test scores on the bottom. Obviously, in the beginning of the cohort, we would only have their pre-test scores, but we would update the post-test scores at the end of the class to see the progress, whether we had any gains from the class. And at a glance, we can see where our general strengths are, areas of improvement are. Just kind of gives us a good idea also of whether they're going to be ready to take that industry certification.
Or also just to see any gaps. If you're looking at that row 2, sample student 1, you'll notice that he had a pre-test, but no post-test. So we missed an opportunity on post-testing that student. So these are the tools we're using to kind of capture information so that we don't miss out. Now, how does this report get created? One of us, we don't ask the teachers to do this. We'll do an export from our student management system and pre-dump all the information that we have that's relevant and pertinent that we think the teachers might need or be interested in, and create the Excel for the teachers. We'll then provide it to the teachers with an ask, and that ask is helping us maintain the spreadsheet as the class keeps moving forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and why that's important, why they might be the best fit for it.
So we use goals, just to clarify what these test scores are here. These are goals or ABE NRS levels. So next in column I, we have the Parapro test status, or this would be the industry certification status for a different IET. At the start of this column, or start of this class, the column was blank, right? They hadn't taken that yet. But as we closed the class, we updated that column to who passed, who may have pending tests, who may need to take it again. See here, that's student, sample student 3 needs to take it again. They need to do some more prep before they go back and take that exam again.
And I know Vanessa mentioned it earlier, but just for those that are kind of working on their IET programs, what comes first? Do you do the industry cert first and then do the post-test for the adult ed program? And in our case, we always focus on our post-test first and then go into the industry certification later. And why are we doing that? We're doing it intentionally to see where they are in their math and their reading and their language skills, so that did we bring them up to the right level to be successful on that industry cert? And depending what that industry cert is, do we need to focus more on math or reading later on to ensure their success on that industry certification? So it is very intentional.
And since people are taking the industry certification at the end of the class, or maybe even after the class, we have to keep coming back to the spreadsheet and monitoring and making sure that we are keeping up with our students and making sure that they are signed up to take that exam.
So I'll circle back. We did mention earlier that one of those program indicators of program success, or those primary indicators of program success, that industry certifications are an indicator. So we definitely want to be capturing that information. And then we need to make sure if it's captured here, then we want to make sure that it's captured in our student management system so that it gets reported to the state. The post-test is the first and easiest level or way to get a performance from a student. And that is why we're also capturing that here, because if we miss that post-test, we missed our easiest way of showing growth and a measurable skill gain for the students. So that's why these spreadsheets become important. But again, just because it's on this spreadsheet doesn't mean it gets reported to the state. This is something now we have to intentionally be mindful of updating our student management system.
It's a great way to spot check, make sure you have the right data. So then we have their contact information, which of course is relevant to all stakeholders. And then we're moving into these green columns here, M through Q. This is from our survey. So the information that goes in these columns comes from those surveys. We take the results, consolidate the information, and now we can kind of look at everyone's answers at once and notice patterns, be reminded of things that we might need to follow up on, remind us of things that we need to focus on in the class, show any needs for wraparound services. So that's a lot of information you can get from the surveys. So for example, let's look at student sample 5, just kind of highlight the row there. In row 6, we can see from column N right here that she is a current Collier County, she is a current Collier County Public School employee who needs to feel more comfortable in her position there. So we can see that a barrier for her was not having enough training or information from her place of employment. She needs to pass the Parapro exam quickly. She was feeling under pressure, but she also needs to feel more confident in her position. And then a totally different situation would be sample student 3, who is pursuing her GED while taking the Parapro class at the same time. We've had this happen before. This is the second time we've had a GED student doing the class at the same time. We know that not only does she want to be a Parapro and pass the exam, but she urgently needs to finish her GED in order to be able to take a Parapro job. She would like to go on to college and become a teacher in the long range. And so that goal influences her wraparound services, which takes us to the blue columns. So these last couple of columns here, scroll over, last 3 columns.
And I'll back up a little bit before we get into the wraparound services. So those survey and these green columns really help the teacher now understand where the student is coming from, the potential barriers, their goals, so that she can guide each student in a different path. While the end goal is still the same, the parapro exam, because if they don't pass that parapro exam, they can't move on to employment. That'll be their first barrier, unemployment. So that becomes a critical piece. But in doing so, then we can also start looking at what do we want to do beyond that, because we're seeing tremendous potential in individuals, whether it's parapro, whether it's our AutoCAD and drafting program, whether it's our nursing assistant. We are starting to identify students to be able to go onto additional pathways where the end goal is not just nursing assistant, but potentially practical nursing or RN. In this case here, parapro, the end goal might not be a parapro position, but really, if we have a bachelor's degree or we're working towards that, can we continue on to higher education and get that bachelor's in education, or translate our degrees from our countries to continue on as a teacher here in the US? Sorry about that.
That's all good. All right, so these blue columns, these are the columns that we're going to follow up with students. So this is not just during the class, but after the class is over. We need to go back to the spreadsheet and make sure that we have followed through on these things. So again, we know that sample student 3 is going to benefit from continuing her services with CareerSource, getting her GED. But also, we're going to help connect her to Future Makers and Florida Gulf Coast University. They're partners of ours, as there is a grant out there to help her achieve her long-term goal of getting a bachelor's degree in education. So the transition plan for each IET may look a little bit different, but for the parapro, the main transition plan is to become a paraprofessional, become employed within the school system, and in some cases, continue on to earning the bachelor's in education. In other cases, the Student Success Plan has helped us identify participants with bachelor's degrees. Student sample 1 was an example here. And realizing that they could transition to being a teacher within the school system or in adult education through alternative certification. So this is someone that's using the parapro class to advance to being a parapro, but they could, advance pretty quickly to becoming a teacher through alternative certification. And
So I know we're talking a lot about parapro in this particular case, but so let's pivot a little bit and bring it from a different perspective. So we have another IET program, and it's an intro to healthcare. There is no industry certification in that introductory class. The only measurable skill gain that we can attain from that is showing a learning gain. So going from a reading 4 to a reading 5, or a math 5 to a math 6. NRS level. So that's the only measurable skill gain we could do. But we still use a success plan like this to ensure that the student, one, is making that growth. We're identifying those challenges. We're supporting them with those challenges. But more importantly, as we've seen in our past cohorts, we're bringing in individuals that are some that have no experience in nursing and want to move into the nursing career, others that are nurses in their countries and want to continue where they left off. And that helps us then, as we're assessing their language skills and we're assessing their academic skills, we can start moving them faster and saying, hey, instead of having to wait to do our next course, we already know that there's a technical training program starting up in practical nursing. You're ready to start there, and we walk them through that process. Or there's a surgical tech or medical assisting program that's starting up, and they're interested in moving into that pathway. And so we're able to transition them quicker, and having known that they have the foundational skills, and hand them off properly to the technical college for them to gain admission and move on into that world of work.
So this last column T here, this could be any kind of employment, but this is our employed as a parapro ? This is where we're tracking who's been able to find employment based on completing the IET program. So this is constantly updating. I'm still going back to 2022 to 2023 and updating the parapro employment column because it's still changing. There's some people that kind of get frozen up at the end. And I just was on the phone with a former student the other day who was frozen. She did not know how to proceed with applying She was also embarrassed about having to take the exam a second time. So it was kind of that reassurance that she needed and connecting her with the right resources. So there's a lot of following up that has to be done even way after a class is completed.
So we have a question or two that have come in. So maybe we can pause for a second and address those. So one question asks, how do you gather data regarding industry certification and or employment? So that's a loaded question, and so we'll take it piece by piece. So how do we gather data regarding industry certification? Well, and very timely. It's gathered by, we depend on, there's different ways, but oftentimes the easiest way is gathering it from the student themselves. So that's why we rely heavily on the teacher, because the teacher has the strongest relationship with the student to be able to know that we've scheduled them for the test, and hey, how did we do on the test? And regardless if we did great or we weren't successful, we want to know because we need to know so that we can help them become successful next time around. So by them knowing we're there regardless of how it went, they're more willing to share with us. So we do depend on that. In some cases, like nursing assistant, we're able to go on the Florida Department of Health and pull that information because that's a license certification in that case. So each one will have a different pathway. However, the most reliable way, the one that's that's fastest, is always going to be from the student. And that's why we ask our teachers to help us in maintaining these spreadsheets, because not only does it give them a lot of information at a glance, it also allows us to know the information that's most critical. And then obviously we're asking our students to provide us with a copy of the industry certification, because that guarantees us that yes, they were successful and in which areas. In terms of employment, Vanessa, do you want to talk a little bit about the employment aspect, since you've been doing a little bit of that?
Yeah, so we've partnered with, so using Parapro as an example, we've partnered with our human resources for Collier County Public Schools. And they're been a great resource for helping our students make that bridge from IET to employment. But also it's a lot of phone calls, emails, asking them where they are in the process. And what I found has really helped open the conversation is, how can I help you with whatever is next? Do you need help with anything? And when I've asked that question, do you need my help? I'd like to help if I can. Then I usually get a lot more responses. Sometimes students are they're embarrassed about not knowing how to proceed, which jobs are for them on the employment page, filling out the application, getting references. So it's a lot of following up with them through emails and phone calls, as well as partnering with human resources. They've been a huge help as well.
And Vanessa, as we talk about, we might be getting ahead a little bit, but I think it's timely because we're talking about how we gather information about their employment. One of our gaps that we've identified. So we use these spreadsheets of a student success plan to also reflect a little bit on what are our successes and what areas need improvement on. So one of the things we saw recently, it's come up that as our students we're assuming they're going in and applying for jobs because we make that a part of our content, but we realized that they weren't applying for jobs, even though they've passed the industry certification, the Parapro. And part of that was because one, they weren't sure of their next steps. They weren't sure of where to start the process, even though we shared it in class. So that kind of highlighted for us the need to do something more within our next cohorts to ensure their success.
Yeah, so an example is we have some of the application questions in their course, so they can kind of get an idea what an application is like when they're applying to be a paraprofessional in public schools. And then we're going to do some mock interviews at the end of the class with human resources, just to help them get more confident with speaking to an employer with those interview questions. A lot of it's nerves. So if we can take the nerves down by integrating some of that into the class, then all the better.
So while employment is not something that is being submitted in terms of our IET programs to the state and reported to the state. We don't have any role in that. We know that the state is pulling that from using our students' social security numbers, and that's being then submitted for NRS purposes. However, we know that if the ultimate goal for an IET is to transition them to employment, and we're not tracking to see if our students are getting employed, then how do we know that if we're being successful or not? And so that's part of why we embedded this piece of it. If not now, down the line, we already know this is being monitored at one level. So it's in our best interest to ensure that we are being proactive in working towards a successful IET program by meeting the needs of our students, which is their main goal is employment or advancement in employment. Another question that came in, are IETs required to have an industry certification as part of the program? And the response is no. IET programs or an IET program is not required to have an industry certification tied to it. However, if we can lead students to it or transition students to technical training programs where they can advance and earn those certifications, absolutely. What else?
One other question in the chat that I don't know if you can.
Well, I'll let you keep going and I'll take a look at it.
All right. So we're going to just keep moving and then we'll come back to some questions here. So next thing is to think about possible challenges. And certainly there are going to be challenges in creating a student success plan. So sometimes the hardest part is getting started, where to begin, who to involve. Much of this has been implemented from our experience with IET and the intent behind the specific IET program. So as we identify gaps or weaknesses within our IET, that's when we start to create or embed the support mechanisms to ensure its intended outcomes. So for example, our parapro students were sometimes frozen, like I said, after completing the class and passing the exam. So we realized that we needed to not only prep them better for applying for employment, but we also needed to follow up with students after they complete the class. And we've also learned to include more people on the student success plan. So this isn't just for administrators. This is for teachers. This is for advisors, counselors, navigators, any other resource staff that play a key role in transitioning students to their next steps. So more hands and eyes means better support for our students. So while each IET is unique, they each bring their own challenges and unique circumstances. However, having a student success plan by each IET program from the start allows you to ensure that key elements critical for success within the IET have been established. It then also facilitates reflection as to the success of the cohort of IET students.
So just to clarify, going back to the industry certification, wanting to make sure that it's clear, while an industry certification is not required, or an IET program is not required to have an industry certification tied to it, if there is an industry certification tied to it, we want to make sure that it's on the master's credential list and the Perkins post-secondary final industry recognized credentials list. And if we're not sure where to gather that information, I'm going to refer you to the DOE for that. But there are specific certifications that are eligible for to meet the measurable skill gains. Not all certifications meet that, so you'll want to reference the Department of Ed for that guidance.
Okay, so the challenges, think about your own challenges, your own unique circumstances. We need to figure out, we have to gather our team. We have to remember that more eyes and hands, the more support our students have. We need to focus on the objective of each IET program. Is it employment? Is it continuing to a technical program? Is it both? And then we need to survey our students and collect data and use this information to complete your shareable spreadsheet, sharing it with the stakeholders or your IET team. And then finally, an important part that is often neglected is to monitor the spreadsheet throughout the course, as well as follow up with students after the class is completed. Any other questions or comments?
I don't see any
of the
others
act?
coming in.
Awesome.
So as we come to a conclusion, we want to thank everyone today for connecting. We hope that this was helpful and an actionable way to ensure success within your IET program and its students. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Vanessa. Our emails are posted there.
Oh, and I see Kathy put her contact information in there as well.
Absolutely. A great contact person for any questions regarding IET is always our local IET director, Catherine O'Neill. And she is a wealth of knowledge and will probably be able to address those industry certification questions and any of those measurable skill gain questions more in depth, as we're limited on time. With that said, before we leave today, please take a moment to complete the IP Day survey. If you found today's webinar helpful, you may be interested in connecting on Wednesday, December 6th, which I think is next week, for Learning English as an Adult, Myths, Facts, and Competencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.